You two need to step away right now, do you hear me? This is a lawful order.
Officer, we're not going anywhere. It's our wedding.
I said move!
Oh my God, he's actually doing this.
Back up or there'll be consequences.
The rotating lights of the patrol cruiser did not just flash. They sliced through the elegant darkness of the Sterling Manor grounds, fracturing the carefully curated atmosphere of the evening. It was 8:42 p.m. on a Saturday in mid-September. Inside the ballroom, the air was thick with the scent of white roses and expensive perfume, carrying the soft, rhythmic pulse of a live jazz saxophone. Outside, on the gravel drive, a career was ending, a massive lawsuit was beginning, and the fragile facade of a post-racial society was crumbling in real time. What happened that night wasn't just a misunderstanding. It wasn't a simple clash of personalities or a procedural error. It was a violent collision between two versions of America. One version was represented by Dr. Alicia Ross and Marcus Thorne, successful, dignified, and celebrating their union surrounded by black excellence. The other version was represented by Officer Silas Vance, a man who saw a black couple in a high-end venue and didn't see success. He saw a crime in progress. Before we unravel the minute-by-minute account of this catastrophe, take a moment to check in. Where are you watching from tonight? We have a global community here dedicated to truth and accountability, so drop your city or country in the comments. And if you believe that justice should be blind but never silent, hit that subscribe button. You are going to want to see how this one ends, because the fallout from this single night would rewrite the rules for an entire police department. To understand the sheer magnitude of the violation that occurred that night, we first have to understand the perfection that preceded it. Alicia Ross was not just a bride. At 32, she was one of the youngest attending neurosurgeons at St. Jude's Regional Hospital. Her hands, currently manicured and holding a bouquet of rare orchids, had saved the lives of 3 children in the week leading up to her wedding. She was a woman of precision, immense intelligence, and steel determination. She had fought her way through medical school and a grueling residency, often being the only woman of color in the room, to reach the pinnacle of her field. Her groom, Marcus Thorne, was a civil engineer whose firm had secured the contracts to redesign the city's waterfront district. He was a builder, a man who looked at empty spaces and saw potential structures. He was calm, soft-spoken, and commanded respect not by raising his voice, but by the sheer competence he radiated. He was the kind of man who measured twice and cut once, in life and in business. They had been planning this wedding for 24 months. Every detail had been scrutinized. The venue, Sterling Manor, was an architectural masterpiece, a sprawling estate built in the 1920s, featuring manicured boxwood hedges, a marble fountain imported from Italy, and a ballroom with a ceiling painted to resemble the twilight sky. It was the kind of place that required a waiting list and a rigorous background check just to book a tour. It was exclusive, it was expensive, and for Alicia and Marcus, it was the symbol of everything they had worked for. It was their declaration that they had arrived. The guest list was a testament to their standing in the community. There were 150 people in attendance. Among them were department heads from the hospital, partners from major law firms, university professors, tech entrepreneurs, and civic leaders. This was a gathering of the elite. The atmosphere was one of refined joy. There was no raucous behavior. There was no shouting. The alcohol consumption was moderate, the conversation was intellectual, and the mood was serene. So, when the call came into the central dispatch at 8:15 p.m., it was already a lie. The caller, who chose to remain anonymous, reported a riotous disturbance at the Sterling Manor. They spoke of loud, aggressive music, people trespassing on the grounds, and a general sense of danger. It was a weaponized fabrication designed to trigger a police response. It was the kind of call made by someone who looks out their window, sees people they don't think belong in their zip code, and decides to use the police as their personal eviction service. And it worked. Officer Silas Vance was the responding unit. Vance was a 15-year veteran of the force. He was a man who had spent the last decade patrolling the affluent suburbs, acting as the unofficial gatekeeper of the wealthy enclaves. He drove his cruiser with a sense of ownership over the streets. In the locker room, he had a reputation as a hard charger, a euphemism for an officer who enjoyed the physical dominance of the job. But in the hushed filing cabinets of the Internal Affairs Division, he was known for something else. Vance had 8 prior complaints lodged against him. Every single one involved African-American citizens. Every single one alleged unnecessary aggression, disrespect, and escalation. And every single one had been dismissed for insufficient evidence or policy compliance. The system had taught Silas Vance that he was untouchable. It had taught him that his instincts, no matter how biased, were always right. At 8:42 p.m., Vance's patrol cruiser crunched onto the gravel of the Sterling Manor driveway. He didn't park in the designated area for emergency vehicles. He didn't pull to the side to assess the situation. He pulled his car right up to the main entrance, blocking the valet circle, leaving his lights flashing. The strobe effect bounced off the marble columns, startling the guests who were enjoying cocktails on the terrace. The harsh blue and red lights washed over the faces of the valet staff, who froze in confusion. A prudent officer, responding to a noise complaint at a high-end venue, would have sought out the manager. They would have walked to the reception desk. They would have listened. If Vance had listened, he would have heard only the gentle hum of a cello and the low murmur of polite conversation. He would have heard laughter, not yelling. But Vance didn't listen. He got out of his car, adjusted his heavy utility belt, and walked past the stunned valet with a look of grim determination. He wasn't there to investigate. He was there to enforce. He scanned the terrace, his eyes narrowing as he assessed the crowd. On the terrace, Alicia and Marcus were stealing a quiet moment away from the reception line. They were standing near the stone balustrade, looking out over the moonlit gardens. Alicia's veil had been removed, but her white silk gown glowed in the ambient lighting. Marcus had his arm around her waist, protective and loving. They were laughing softly with Marcus's grandmother, a 90-year-old matriarch named Hattie, who was seated in a wheelchair beside them. They were looking at digital photos on a phone, reminiscing about the ceremony. It was a tableau of pure, wholesome family joy. It was the picture of the American dream. Officer Vance marched up the stone steps. His boots were heavy on the pavement. He didn't offer a greeting. He didn't apologize for the interruption. He walked straight up to the groom, entering his personal space with aggressive intent. "Who's running this?" Vance barked. The music didn't stop immediately, but the conversation nearby died instantly. The sudden intrusion of a harsh, commanding voice into such a gentle setting was jarring. It was like a glass shattering on a tile floor. Marcus turned. He blinked, confused. The transition from loving husband to suspect was too fast for his brain to process immediately. "Excuse me, officer. I said, who is running this event?" Vance repeated, his hand resting casually but threateningly on the handle of his baton. "I've got reports of a disturbance and trespassing." Marcus straightened his spine. He was a tall man, 6'2", but he made a conscious effort not to appear threatening, a survival reflex that every black man in America learns before he learns to drive. He kept his hands visible. He kept his voice level. "Officer, I'm the groom. This is my wedding. There is no disturbance here." Vance looked at Marcus. Then he looked at Alicia in her couture gown. Then he looked at Grandma Hattie in her wheelchair. A rational mind would have seen a wedding. Vance's mind saw something else. He saw people who were out of place. He saw an anomaly that needed to be corrected. "You're the groom?" Vance said, the skepticism dripping from his voice like acid. "Right. And I'm the police commissioner. I need to see a permit for this gathering, and I need to see ID from both of you. Now." Alicia stepped forward. Her voice was the same one she used in the operating room when a resident made a mistake. Calm, authoritative, and sharp. She was used to being the smartest person in the room, and she wasn't going to let this man trample her dignity. "Officer, this is a private event at Sterling Manor. We have a contract with the venue. We do not carry our driver's licenses in a wedding dress or a tuxedo during our reception." "That is an absurd request." "No ID." Vance stepped closer, his physical presence looming over the bride. "So you can't prove you live here, and you can't prove you rented this place." "That sounds like trespassing to me." This is the moment where the night could have gone two ways. It could have ended with a fearful apology, a frantic search for a purse, and a ruined evening. But this was not a crowd that bowed to bullying. This was a crowd of people who knew the law better than the officer did. Elena, the venue's director, came running from the ballroom. She was a petite woman in a sharp black suit, breathless and horrified. She had managed thousands of events, but she had never seen anything like this. Officer, please! I am the director here. This is the Ross Thorne wedding. They are fully booked, paid clients. Please turn off your lights. You are disturbing the guests." Vance didn't even look at her. He kept his eyes locked on Marcus, engaging in a stare-down that only existed in his own head. "Ma'am, step back. I'm conducting an investigation into illegal occupancy. If you interfere, I'll cite you for obstruction." He turned back to Marcus. "I'm going to tell you one more time. Produce identification, or I'm detaining you until we figure out who you people actually are." "Who you people are?" The phrase hung in the night air, heavy and toxic. It was a dog whistle so loud it might as well have been a siren. By now, the guests had noticed. What started as a few curious glances turned into a wall of witnesses. Phones came out. It started with Marcus's younger brother, dampening the celebratory mood, but capturing the truth. Then a guest from the university pulled out their device. Then Alicia's sister, who immediately started a live stream to her 20,000 followers. "Officer," Marcus said, his voice trembling with suppressed rage, "we are not showing you ID at our own wedding. You are harassing us. Please leave." Vance's face tightened. He wasn't used to no. He wasn't used to people in this demographic asserting their rights. To him, defiance was equivalent to guilt. "Turn around," Vance ordered, unclipping a pair of handcuffs from his belt. "You're under arrest for disorderly conduct and failure to identify." The audacity was breathtaking, arresting the groom at his own wedding, handcuffing a man in a tuxedo in front of his grandmother. That was when the cavalry arrived. But it wasn't police backup, it was the guests. Dr. Evelyn Price, the chief of surgery at St. Jude's and Alicia's mentor, stepped out of the crowd. She was a woman of 50, wearing an emerald evening gown and a look of absolute fury. She walked right up to the line Vance had drawn. "Officer," she stated, her voice projecting with the clarity of a lecture hall. "I am Dr. Evelyn Price, chief of surgery. You are currently harassing one of the most respected surgeons in this state. If you put handcuffs on that man, you will be facing a lawsuit before you even get him to the station." Vance sneered, barely glancing at her. "Back up, lady." "I will not," she replied. She stood her ground, her eyes blazing. Then a shadow moved from the left, a man with silver hair and a posture that looked like it was carved from granite. It was Judge Harlan Thorne, Marcus's uncle. He was a sitting federal circuit court judge. He didn't shout. He didn't wave his arms. He simply walked into the circle of light with the weight of federal authority on his shoulders. "Officer," the judge said. The single word cracked like a whip. "My name is Judge Harlan Thorne, Federal District of the 6th Circuit. I suggest you look at me." Vance blinked. He looked at the older man. He saw the expensive cut of the tuxedo. He heard the tone of command that far outstripped his own. He saw the face of a man who signed warrants for a living. "You are currently violating the Fourth Amendment rights of these citizens," Judge Thorne continued, reciting the law as if he were reading a menu. "You have no probable cause. You have no reasonable suspicion. You are trespassing on private property without a warrant or exigent circumstances. If you touch my nephew, I will personally ensure that your badge is not the only thing you lose." Vance hesitated. For the first time, the armor of his arrogance showed a crack. He looked around. He saw the phones, dozens of them. The red recording lights were like little eyes staring him down. He saw the crowd, not a riot, but a gathering of doctors, lawyers, and business moguls, all standing with their arms crossed, all defying him. But pride is a dangerous drug. Instead of retreating, Vance doubled down. He felt cornered, and his training told him to dominate the space. He grabbed Marcus's arm. "I said turn around!" Vance shouted, trying to regain control through volume. The reaction was instantaneous. The guests didn't attack. They didn't scream. They moved. In a spontaneous act of solidarity, the front row of guests, the best man, the bridesmaids, the partners from the law firm, stepped forward and linked arms. They formed a human semicircle between the officer and the couple. It was a visual that would be plastered on the front page of every newspaper in the country the next morning. The black tuxedo of the groom and the white dress of the bride, protected by a wall of black excellence against the blue uniform of the state. "You'll have to arrest all of us," Alicia said from behind the wall of her friends. Her voice broke just for a second, not from fear, but from the overwhelming emotion of seeing her community rise up. Vance pulled his radio. "Dispatch, I need backup. I have a hostile crowd at Sterling Manor, large-scale disturbance." "Hostile crowd," a voice rang out. It was Elena, the venue director, who was now on the phone with the precinct captain. "Captain, this is Elena at Sterling Manor. Your officer is lying. He is threatening a federal judge and a surgeon. I am sending you the video feed right now." Everything seemed to happen at once. The live stream numbers were climbing. 5,000, 10,000 viewers. Comments were pouring in, identifying the officer, tagging the mayor, tagging the governor. Let's pause here for a second. If you were in that crowd, if you were wearing your best clothes, celebrating your best friend, and you saw a gun on a hip and a badge being used as a weapon, what would you have done? Would you have stepped into that line, risking your own arrest? It's a question we all like to think we know the answer to, but until you feel the heat of that moment, you never really know. Tell me in the comments what you think the right move was. Back on the terrace, the standoff lasted 7 minutes. 7 minutes of Vance posturing, hand hovering near his taser, while the guests stood like statues. Then, the siren wails changed. These weren't the leisurely sirens of a patrol. These were the urgent, frantic sirens of supervisors who knew a PR disaster was unfolding. 2 squad cars and an unmarked SUV screeched up the driveway, scattering gravel. Sergeant Miller, the shift supervisor, slammed his car door and ran toward the terrace. He didn't need to be told what was happening. He could feel the tension radiating off the property. He saw the linked arms. He saw the judge. He saw the terrified 90-year-old woman in the wheelchair. And he saw Vance, red-faced and manic, holding onto the arm of a groom in a tuxedo. "Vance, let him go!" Miller screamed, bypassing all protocol. "Back off! Now!" Vance looked at his sergeant, confused. "Sarge, they're refusing to ID. You've got nothing." Miller was in his face now, physically shoving Vance back, creating space between the officer and the family. "Step back to the vehicle. Now!" Miller turned to the crowd. He took off his hat. He looked at Judge Thorne, whom he recognized immediately from court appearances. The color drained from the sergeant's face. He knew the department was already in a legal grave. He was just trying to stop them from digging it deeper. "Judge Thorne," Miller said, his voice breathless. I am incredibly sorry." "Save it for the record, Sergeant," Judge Thorne said icily. "I want that man's name and badge number, and I want him removed from this property before I call the FBI Civil Rights Division." Vance, standing by the fountain, realized the tide had turned, but he couldn't help himself. The humiliation of being dressed down in front of these people was too much. As he walked past Marcus to get to the patrol car, he leaned in, his voice a low, venomous hiss that he thought only the groom would hear. "You got lucky tonight, boy, but you don't belong here. I'll be seeing you." It was a threat, a direct, menacing threat, but Vance had forgotten one thing. In the age of technology, privacy is a myth. Marcus was holding his phone by his side, recording audio. The camera on Alicia's sister's phone was zoomed in. The microphone picked it up. "You don't belong here." Marcus looked the officer in the eye. He didn't flinch. "I built this terrace," Marcus said calmly. "I designed the drainage system for this estate 3 years ago. I belong here more than you ever will." Vance was escorted to the patrol car by his supervisor like a delinquent child. As the cruiser pulled away, the flashing lights finally died, returning the estate to the soft glow of the garden lamps. But the party was over. The adrenaline crash hit Alicia first. She sat down on a stone bench, her dress pooling around her, and began to shake. It wasn't the weeping of a bride who had a bad hair day. It was the visceral reaction to trauma. It was the realization that no amount of success, no amount of money, and no amount of prestige could protect her from the color of her skin. The guests didn't leave. They didn't go back to their appetizers. They rallied. The wedding reception transformed into a war room. Judge Thorne was already on the phone with the district attorney. Dr. Price was dictating a statement to the hospital's PR department, ensuring the medical board would be behind them. Elena, the venue director, was printing the security footage. They cut the cake an hour later. It wasn't the joyous moment they had planned. It was an act of defiance. Marcus and Alicia stood in the center of the ballroom, surrounded by their people. They cut the cake not because they were hungry, but because they refused to let Silas Vance take that moment from them too. When they fed each other the slice, the room erupted, not in polite applause, but in a roar of support, a promise that this wasn't the end. The next morning, the sun rose, but Officer Silas Vance's career did not. The video titled "Wedding While Black, Officer Crashes Reception" had 3 million views by breakfast. The hashtag Sterling Manor incident was the #1 trending topic in the United States. The comment section was a firestorm, but it wasn't just internet noise. It was organized pressure. The mayor's phone lines were jammed. The police chief's email server crashed. The city was waking up to a nightmare of its own making. Officer Vance was placed on administrative leave at 8 a.m. At 10 a.m., the investigative journalist for the city's largest paper broke the story about Vance's 8 previous complaints. She detailed how the department had buried them. Suddenly, this wasn't just about one wedding. It was about a decade of negligence. It was about a culture that allowed men like Vance to operate with impunity. Alicia and Marcus didn't hide. They didn't go on their honeymoon to the Maldives. They went to a press conference. Standing on the steps of the federal courthouse, flanked by Dr. Price and Judge Thorne, they looked every bit the power couple they were. "We aren't asking for an apology," Alicia told the bank of microphones. "An apology doesn't fix the trauma of being treated like a criminal at your own wedding. We are asking for a complete restructuring of the Disciplinary Review Board, and we are filing a federal civil rights lawsuit." The city tried to settle quickly. They knew they were holding a losing hand. They offered $500,000, hoping to make the problem disappear. Marcus's lawyer, a pit bull of a litigator named Sarah Jenkins, laughed at the offer. "Add a zero," she reportedly told the city attorney, "and we might pick up the phone." The internal affairs investigation moved with a speed that is rare in bureaucracy. Why? Because the evidence was undeniable. The audio of Vance threatening Marcus, "You don't belong here," was the nail in the coffin. It proved malice. It proved bias. It proved that his actions were not a mistake of judgment, but an act of hate. 6 weeks later, Silas Vance was fired, but the story didn't end in the HR department. Because Judge Thorne had made a call to the Department of Justice, the FBI had opened a parallel investigation. The federal indictment came down 3 months after the wedding. Silas Vance was charged with deprivation of rights under color of law. It is a serious charge, one that carries the weight of the federal government behind it. The trial was a spectacle. Vance's defense attorney tried to paint him as a dedicated officer who made an honest mistake in the heat of the moment. He tried to argue that the guests were aggressive and that Vance feared for his safety. But the jury saw the video. They saw the calm demeanor of the doctor and the engineer. They saw the aggression of the officer. They saw the wall of excellence standing silently. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours. Guilty. Silas Vance was sentenced to 30 months in federal prison. He lost his pension. He lost his right to carry a firearm. He lost the authority he had abused for so long. The civil suit was settled for $2.5 million. But here is the part of the story that really matters. It's not about the money. Alicia and Marcus didn't buy a new house. They didn't buy sports cars. They took the entire settlement amount and started the Sterling Foundation. It's a nonprofit organization that provides legal defense funds for victims of racial profiling who don't have a federal judge for an uncle or a chief of surgery for a mentor. They recognized that their outcome was the exception, not the rule. They used their privilege to build a shield for others. Today, if you go to Sterling Manor, there is a new policy. Police are not allowed on the grounds without the direct approval of the general manager or a warrant. The staff is trained to handle anonymous complaints with extreme skepticism. Alicia and Marcus are still married, of course. They have a son now. And when they look at their wedding album, they don't skip the pages with the police lights in the background. They look at them. They look at the photo of their friends linking arms. They look at the photo of them cutting the cake with defiant smiles. They view it not as the day their wedding was ruined, but as the day they found out exactly how strong they really were. They view it as the day they stood their ground. This story leaves us with a lingering thought. Justice was served here, yes, but it required a perfect storm, a wealthy couple, video evidence, influential witnesses, and viral fame. What happens when the victim is a cashier, or a mechanic, or a student walking home alone? Silas Vance is in prison, but the system that allowed him to operate for 15 years with 8 complaints is still there. We want to know what you think. Was the sentence of 30 months enough for stealing the most important day of someone's life? Or should the punishment for abusing a badge be even harsher? Let's talk about it in the comments. And please, if you found this story moved you, or share it. Share it not just for the drama, but for the lesson. Accountability only happens when we refuse to look away. I'm your host, and thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one. Stay safe and know your rights.